Given 1 minute for a closing statement. Candidates' closing statements will be given in the opposite order as the opening statements to try to be fair. And again, there will be the yellow sign and then the red sign on the ballot. Okay, this is interesting. Candidates may use notes on an electronic device, but may not use electronic devices for research during the debate. So you can't cheat by looking up stuff when we're not looking in order to try to gain an advantage. The forum will be captured on video and is being streamed on Facebook Live on the Sully Democrats website. And you'll be pleased to know, I hope, that some of my colleagues from the media are here this evening. Andrea Worker from the Fairfax Connection, Angela Woolsey from the Fairfax Times, Matt Morrison from the BBC is here, taking an interest in this local race, and my distinguished colleague, Jenna Portnoy from the Washington Post. So, thank you. We don't get applause for the media at Republican events. So the 5 candidates, starting at the end, I'm just going to briefly introduce them, are Dr. Julia Biggins, an infectious disease scientist, Allison Friedman, an anti-human trafficking expert, Dan Helmer, an Army veteran, Paul Pelletier, a former federal prosecutor, Lindsay Davis Stover, a former Obama administration official, and Jerry Foltz sitting in for Senator Wexton. So now, for the last time until the end, everybody may applaud the candidates. And please, no applause or cheering. It'll eat up time. It'll give an appearance of somebody's, packed the room and they're in somebody's favor. Really, no, just listen to what these people have to say. Now, the questions. We'll have introductory remarks first, but I'm just going to explain about the questions. The questions have been submitted by anyone by email ahead of time, and several have been submitted to me on note cards. We got about 30 questions altogether. I had discretion to pick which questions I wanted to use. I don't think we're going to have time to get anywhere near 30. I think probably 10 is probably more likely. But I've selected them according to sort of a mix of national topics, local topics, one international question, and 1 or 2 on party political issues. And I added 2 of my own, but all the rest were submitted by the public. So we'll start with the 3-minute opening statements, and we will begin with Dr. Julie Biggins.
There we go. Hi everyone, thank you so much for having us here. We are 3 weeks out from today, from the primary, and so I think it's a really important time that you get to know what your particular candidates stand for and what they will work for when elected to Congress, when we beat Barbara Comstock in the fall. So as was said, my name is Julia Biggins, and I am running to unseat Barbara Comstock, but I'm also here to fight for science. I'm an infectious disease scientist. I have a PhD in molecular virology from Baylor College of Medicine. And for the last 20 years, I have spent my career fighting some of the world's most dangerous diseases, from HIV to Ebola, from influenza to dengue to Zika. But I have never seen a disease quite like the one that is running through our Congress and the White House right now. And that disease, I believe, is in part due to the professional political class that we see in Congress. And that class is made up of lawyers, lobbyists, political operatives that are afraid of transparency, dismissive of facts, and more interested in saying the right thing rather than doing the right thing. And that's why I'm running for Congress, in order to do the right thing. In fact, our revolution, Northern Virginia, has recently endorsed my campaign because they understand that I will do the right thing in moving forward our progressive values and our democratic values for this country. Unfortunately, right now, we're not governed by scientists, but maybe we should be, because I think we need more than just scientists right now in Congress. We need more teachers and engineers, more doctors, farmers. We need people that look like us. In 2017, last year, we did a great job of electing a diverse slate of candidates to Richmond, and I think we need to do the same at the federal level. We need more women of color, members of the LGBTQ community. We need more people with experience like us. Barbara Comstock is a member of that professional political class. She actually sits on the House Science and Technology Committee. Personally, I think that seat would be better filled with an actual scientist rather than another Washington insider. And if we're going to beat Barbara Comstock in the fall, we need a candidate that can draw a sharp contrast, not just in rhetoric, but in ideas and in background. I put forth that we need a scientist and that I am that candidate. I am ready to go toe-to-toe with her on the debate stage in the fall to outline my specific policies that I will work towards in Congress, and I have worked tirelessly over the last several months crisscrossing the district to get to know the values of VA10. So I look forward to answering all the questions that you've submitted here tonight, and thank you for having us.
And the moderator neglected to identify the timekeeper, who is Ted Velkoff. Thank you, Ted, for being the timekeeper. And now we'll hear from Allison Friedman.
My name is Allison Friedman, and you don't need to be in a Dem committee room to know that this time is different. In this administration's incompetence and cruelty and corruption, they've laid that reality bare. We know, right? This isn't about picking sides. This is about people and principles and who we are. This is about big ideas and necessary walls, not between countries, but between corporations and campaigns, between the NRA's influence and our knowledge that we are safe from gun violence and that our kids are safe from gun violence. That would matter in any election, but this election, it matters more. We are fast approaching a constitutional crisis, not just of this president's making, but of Congress's making. As we're watching our representatives trade off principles that used to secure our democracy for political expediency. And I know one of those principles is compromise. But I think it's really important that we understand that those compromises are only valuable if they're in service of people rather than in service of the convenience of politicians. There's a lot of good compromise that can be made on gun violence prevention. I would submit to you that a deal around concealed carry reciprocity that was negotiated in secret with the NRA and opposed by 60 gun violence prevention groups that 11 democratically elected state senators voted against, that State Senator Wexton supported, is not one of those deals. I also believe that allowing people to keep firearms in unlocked glove compartments endangers Virginians. That's what Governor Terry McAuliffe said when he vetoed a bill, also opposed by 13 Democratic state senators, that Senator Wexton supported. I am proud to be joined on stage by four other candidates who stand with me in opposing corporate PAC donations because we know it's a matter of principle. For State Senator Wexton, questions remain. She took corporate PAC money, then took a pledge not to take it. And I wonder whether her principles evolved or whether it was just political calculations. We have an incredible opportunity in this election, not just to win this seat back, but to defend our democracy from its attacks. But only if we remember the integrity that is demanded in the office we seek. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Dan Helmer.
I gave my first ever campaign speech to the Sully Democrats, so I'm pretty excited to be here and hope I do better this time. My name is Dan Helmer, and I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm running for Congress. I'm a West Point graduate and Rhodes Scholar, the son of an immigrant and the grandson of Holocaust survivors who came here as refugees. I'm the father of two amazing boys in our Fairfax County public schools, and my wife Karen is a Union Fairfax County public school teacher. I served combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, where I was the recipient of the Bronze Star, and in the private sector, worked with U.S. manufacturers so we remain a country that makes things, and then had a chance to work with the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I was a project leader on a team that found $1 billion of savings that we could redirect towards our veterans. And after we've lost 5 times in a row to Barbara Comstock, running local elected officials and DC insiders, I'd offer them the best chance we have to finally beat her in November. Because I can offer the starkest contrast between her service to special interests and my record of service to our country. But while winning's important, it's also about having the courage to fight for our progressive values after you win. And I will. I've seen firsthand the consequences of Washington cowardice. It's inscribed on the headstones of my friends. And as someone who's carried an assault rifle in the deserts of Iraq and the hills of Afghanistan, I'm ready to fight the NRA so the weapons of war I carried have no place in our streets or in our schools. For almost my entire adult life, my family and I have gotten our health care as a result of my military service. Government provided health care so that we get sick, we're taken care of. And I know that in the richest country in the history of the world, every American ought to be able to get the same health care I'm entitled to as a veteran. So I support a Medicare for all option that will allow any American who doesn't have health care or doesn't like what they have to opt into Medicare. But we can't fight for any of this unless we challenge the pervasive culture of corruption that dominates Washington today. So I've taken a pledge. I have never, don't now, and will never take a dime of corporate PAC money. And finally, after 9/11, the gravest threat to our democracy lived in a cave. Now he lives in the White House. And I'm ready to stand up to him on day one. I'm ready to be part of a new generation of leaders who will put country before party, service before self, and people before politics, who will fight for us. Because I've been doing it all my life, and I hope you'll join me to earn your vote on June 12th. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Paul Pelletier.
Thank you. Thank you. Is Maggie the only one that's voting tomorrow? I hope you don't mind if I address my opening comments to Maggie. No, I'm just kidding. Look, when I've knocked on doors all across this district for the past several months, and when people come to the door, once they find out I'm not selling anything, they ask not about whether or not we can get rid of Barbara Comstock first. They ask not about their health care or their prescription drug prices. They ask not about their taxes. What they ask me about is our government. Why isn't it working for me? Democrats or Republicans, why is establishment politics broken? We just want a government where people actually agree and fix our problems. And I'll tell you, as a federal prosecutor for more than 27 years, I actually got to see what good government looks like. You know, for each and every day of my career, I had the privilege and honor of just being a public servant, doing what was right, and taking on and fighting to hold accountable those who did wrong. I want to keep doing that, and that's why I'm running for Congress now. Because I want to help end the era of broken government. You know, for as long as I can remember, I just wanted to have this, I had this commitment and this passion just to want to do what's right for my country. I never, ever, ever dreamed that I would be a politician. But about 6 months ago, I decided I just couldn't sit around any longer while these incompetent con men drove our country into the ground. So that's why I'm running now, because I want to actually fix things. I want to make our country better. I want things to work. And I have a career of fighting, of solving problems, and finding common ground to find solutions for people. You know, when I prosecuted drug traffickers, I didn't just say, it's okay, now I put them in jail. I wanted to solve the problem, and I worked very hard to solve the problem. The same thing with healthcare fraud. I worked very hard to make sure that not only did I put them in jail, I saved tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer money. And I worked hard to hold people accountable. And the last con man I put in jail is doing 112 years. I want to do that in Washington for you, and I ask only for your vote. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Lindsay Davis Stover.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Davis Stover, and I don't have to tell you how important this race is. You came here in the pouring rain because you know how important this race is. And we have a congresswoman who has a 97% voting record with Donald Trump, who's bought and paid for by the NRA to the tune of $137,000, and who constantly chooses corporations over our families and our communities. And we saw that in her latest vote on the tax bill. And I think it's one thing to talk about pieces of legislation like the tax bill, the impacts. It's another thing entirely to have lived it. I've lived it. I was raised by a single mom. I know what it's like to work 3 minimum wage jobs and still barely make ends meet. I know what it's like to charge groceries because you can't afford to pay for it otherwise. In fact, I still have over $80,000 worth of student loan debt. That's how I was able to go to college. In fact, if Donald Trump had been my president and Barbara Comstock been my congresswoman, I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had. A kid like mine wouldn't have been able to do some of the things that I've been fortunate to do, like serve in AmeriCorps, serve as chief of staff on Capitol Hill for many years, where we worked on important pieces of legislation for working families, for students, and for veterans. And I got the chance, in fact, the honor of a lifetime, to serve as a senior advisor in the Obama administration, working on veterans policy. And now I'm a small business owner here in Fairfax County, where I'm raising my 2 daughters, and hopefully giving them a few more chances than I had growing up. And there are many issues that I'm passionate about, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of them tonight, but I want to address one right now. I am proud to be a candidate of distinction for Moms Demand Action and endorsed by the Pride Fund to end gun violence, because the idea that ending gun violence is too complicated of an issue for Washington to do something about is absolutely outrageous. This issue is personal for me. In fact, on Friday, time stopped for my family because I had 3 younger cousins in Santa Fe High School. And we were fortunate because they were able to escape. But many families weren't as fortunate. And I am hell-bent to make sure that there is no child in this country who has to experience the hell of an active shooter in their school. I am so thankful to be here with you tonight. I have the lived experience to go head-to-head with Barbara Comstock and win. And I also have extensive federal legislative experience, over 12 years, so I can hit the ground running on day 1. Thank you.
And now, as you know, as Maggie Godbold explained, Senator Wexton, State Senator Wexton couldn't be here because she's busy in Richmond with the special session. And so Jerry Foltz will give an opening statement on her behalf, but that will be the last participation from her camp.
Thank you. I'm honored to share with you these words from Senator Jennifer Wexton. As part of the ongoing battle to expand Medicaid and finish the state budget, the Virginia State Senate was called back into session today at 3:30 p.m., and I have to be there fighting for my constituents and for you. Because the budget has to first be passed out of the Senate and then agreed upon with the House, the senators have all been told that we need to be prepared to stay overnight in Richmond. I'm very disappointed that I'm unable to be at the forum, but I'm proud to be a part of the effort to expand Medicaid, something which will likely be one of the more consequential pieces of progressive legislation to pass in Virginia in our lifetime. This is something I've been fighting for since the first day I was elected to the state Senate in 2014, and is one of the proudest votes I hopefully will take. In addition to expanding Medicaid, the proposed budget boosts Virginia's rainy day fund, fully funds all authorized judgeships, adds 1,319 intellectual and developmental disability waivers, and $715 million to Loudoun schools and $1.4 billion to Fairfax County. It also implements pay raises for teachers, state employees, and direct care staff in state mental hospitals and other behavioral health facilities. I would also like to add that by her voting for things like the GOP tax scam and the repeal of Obamacare, Barbara Comstock and Republican Congress have been systematically trying to strip health care away from millions of Americans. I'm proud that here in Virginia, should Medicaid expansion pass, we are doing our part to expand access to health care to over 300,000 of our residents. I hope you understand the reason for my absence and that everyone has a productive and informative forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we'll turn to the question and answer part. To repeat, we'll be starting with Allison Friedman and proceeding down the row. The first person gets 2 minutes to respond to the question, and then each of the other candidates has 30 seconds to provide a rebuttal or extra comment if they choose. So the first question is on gun control. We got a lot of questions about gun control. We just had a very sobering reminder on Friday from Texas of the importance of this issue, 10 people dead. So the questions are two-part question. First of all, what laws do you think should be the priority for Congress to move forward on related to gun safety and gun violence? And then what strategy do you recommend to overcome the influence of the NRA? Starting with Allison Friedman.
So I am proud to be, I believe, the first candidate in Virginia's history to go on air and launch my campaign with a gun violence prevention commercial. This is something that is deeply personal to me. I've a daughter in the Fairfax County public school system, and we regularly get emails about the gun violence threat. And I have said that one of my first priorities when I get to Congress will be taking on the NRA's influence in Congress. So I'd like to take the second part first. The NRA has falsely framed this debate as if there are only two sides. Take everyone's gun away, or any gun, anytime, no matter what, no questions asked to anyone. That's not accurate, and there are a number of common sense pieces of legislation in the middle of that I would support, like closing the gun show loophole, like banning assault weapons, raising the minimum wage, universal background checks. There are a lot of common sense proposals that don't get to be heard because of the NRA's influence in Washington. And Congresswoman Comstock, who is a top 10 national recipient of NRA funding, I believe is a fundamental part of the problem. So I would never take a dime of NRA money. I have also said that I would support campaign finance reform, which I think is a key component to breaking the NRA's influence. And I will be unequivocal in standing up to them when they push issues like concealed carry, which again, I think is a distinguishing characteristic among this group.
And now 30-second rebuttals or additional comments.
Absolutely, we need meaningful gun safety reform in this country. And I think one of the key ways to getting there, to answer the question, is to have credible messengers. As a soldier, I fired everything from an M9 pistol to an automatic grenade launcher to a tank. I'm not anti-gun and I'm pro-Constitution, but I also believe that that is not the choice that you have, that we have real opportunities for meaningful gun reform in this country, and it's going to be about having credible messengers. And if you haven't seen the video we did about just how easy it is to buy a gun without a background check in a gun show, recommend you go and check it out on our website. Thank you.
You know, my outrage over guns is not new. Oh, for 30 years, I've been trying to take guns off the streets. And when the NRA tells you that we need to enforce the laws we have and not make new laws, that's total BS. 3 laws I would pass. 1, a red flag statute which takes guns away from people who pose a danger to themselves or others. 2, an assault weapons ban. And 3, universal background checks. NRA, I'm coming after you. Stay tuned.
This will be one of my top priorities in Congress. I believe that if you're too dangerous to board an airplane, you should be too dangerous to walk into a gun store and buy a gun. I also believe that those with a record of domestic violence should never get their hands on a firearm. And I believe that the weapons our soldiers use on the streets of Baghdad should never be used in the streets of our community. I will stand up to the NRA to ensure that we don't have our school children, in fact mine's 6, who knows how to get in a corner, curl up in a ball, and put a backpack over our head. Our country is better than this.
Pass it down.
So I think the incident in Santa Fe on Friday is a perfect example of why this has to be a multifaceted approach to gun control. In this situation, the guns were bought legally. There were no red flags about the shooter, and so we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. In particular, we need to make sure we have owner registration and accountability for their firearms, and look back to Australia, who have implemented a gun buyback program and was very successful in getting the most deadly weapons off the street. And bottom line, we need to let the CDC do its research to understand gun violence so that we can understand why it's such a unique problem in this country compared to other countries.
Okay, on to the second question. We'll be starting with Dan Helmer. This is about health care. Again, a 2-part question. Do you support a single-payer health care plan? And if not, then if so, why? And if not, then what other changes would you seek as congressperson in the nation's health care system?
Sure. I think health care is a right, not a privilege. And the best mechanism that we can get there is a Medicare for all option. What that would mean is that any person in this country who gets health care today through the exchanges or through their employer can continue to do so. If you don't, we would add a Medicare for all opt-in option on the exchanges. What that would mean is that based on your income and based on the poverty level and index for inflation, anybody could pay a premium, or if they were to, if they don't have the income to do it, not pay a premium, opt into Medicare. We would roll in Medicaid, and we would roll in CHIP, so we would actually have a single healthcare program. And the reason this would be good is it wouldn't totally disrupt current healthcare. One of the challenges of the ACA in getting these things through politically is the disruption it can provide to the healthcare system today. So people who get their insurance and like it today would still be able to get it. Those who don't or don't like what they get today would be able to opt in. We would be able to use scale, basically the size of the government then, and unleash the ability of the government to negotiate drug prices, procedure prices. We have crazy incentives in our system today. Right now, if you treated your cars the same way we treat healthcare costs, you would not allow payment for an oil change, but when your engine breaks, we would pay to fix it. So we need to pay for more preventative care, we need to pay for more preventative services, we need to offer real opportunity for people to access doctors, not only on a fee-for-service basis, and we need to do it in a way that allows us to use the collective power of the government to get better prices, but still provides people access to the options that they enjoy today. Thanks.
Thank you. Healthcare is a right enjoyed by everybody. And this is one place where Barbara Comstock is most vulnerable. So what we need to do is immediately get the Affordable Care Act working. And I'm the only candidate up here that has actually driven down healthcare costs. I've prosecuted Medicare fraud, and I've made sure that I started strike forces around the country that saved you tens of billions of dollars to this day. Thank you.
Well, I'll start out by saying that I believe healthcare is not just a privilege for those who can afford it. I believe it's a right. And this issue, among many, is one of the most important issues why we need to take back the House this year. Unfortunately, under this administration, we're going to have to do a lot of blocking and tackling just to keep the health care that we have. but it is so important that we get Democrats in Congress and start laying the groundwork to a healthcare system to ensure that everybody has access to affordable, quality healthcare.
Healthcare is definitely a right and not a privilege. I am the only candidate in this race to support the single-payer healthcare program and not an option. If elected, I will support Senator Sanders' bill from the House side in order to implement the single-payer healthcare system. I believe it's the only way for us to achieve true universal coverage that includes pre-existing conditions, mental health issues, dental, and vision, in order to remove the high drug prices and disparate pricing throughout the country. And I also think an important part of this healthcare program needs to focus on prevention.
I also believe that healthcare is a fundamental right. I've said from the outset, I would evaluate any healthcare proposal based on 3 criteria. How does it impact people? How much does it cost? And what's the process in getting there? And I think too often we treat those questions as if they're mutually exclusive, and they're fundamentally not. And we need look no further than Medicaid expansion and how much money we would actually save by providing good health care to people. And I also support an opt-in option.
Thank you. So the next 2 questions are about issues of particular local interest. The first one is on the federal workforce, and Paul Pelletier will be the first to answer. The Trump administration and the Republican Party have pursued budget cuts and other policies aimed at shrinking the federal workforce and or curbing the pay, benefits, and rights of federal workers, many of whom live in this congressional district. So what would you do in Congress to protect the jobs, compensation, and rights of federal workers?
The first thing I would do is I would do my job. I would do my job, and that is to make sure that federal workers were protected. 2 things about this president that I think we all know by now. 1, it's about him, and 2, it's not about you. And we, as the only 30-year federal employee up here, I know that our federal workforce, it is what is protecting and keeping our democracy in balance right now. What this president is trying to do through Scott Pruitt and all of the silly things and the sewer that he has introduced back into Washington is to try and dismantle the rule of law and the democracy as we know it. And I have a lot of friends that continue to be worthwhile federal employees that really are carrying our democracy on their backs right now, and they are struggling. And they need to know that they have someone in Congress who has their back. And what I've told every one of them is that you will know for sure that when you elect me in Congress and we get a Democratic Congress back in power, I and we will have your back. Thank you.
Donald Trump and Barbara Comstock have worked to undermine federal employees. In fact, Barbara Comstock voted for the Holloman rule that would reduce the federal employee's salary down to $1. The Trump administration has proposed cuts to the retirement plan and the federal government's contributions to the thrift savings plan. In Congress, I will fight to make sure that we protect our federal workers and that we give them the respect and the honor they deserve.
I believe that our federal employees are practically a national treasure. You know, it's such a great detriment to this country that agencies like the State Department and the EPA have been gutted as they have been. And my own husband is a federal employee, so I really understand the contribution of the families in this region to our federal workforce. And I think what we need to do is flip the House in the fall so that we can have that strong Congress to stand up to the president and to also make sure that we are protecting their salaries.
When I worked at the State Department as a senior administration official in the Obama administration, I got to work on issues from federal procurement reform to international hostage crises. And we got real results, none of which would have been possible were it not for the experience and expertise of the federal workforce. And watching this administration undermine their fundamental value, both in terms of how they're regarded and respected, but also in the $143 billion in retirement cuts, is unbelievable, and I would argue immoral.
I serve side by side with many federal employees. We need to absolutely fight back and have a congressperson who will stand up and say this narrative that federal employees are the problem and not the dedicated public servants they are. That's what we need to have vocally standing up in Congress. I will do that. I will fight for federal employees every step of the way, fight for their ability to continue to organize, fight for their wages, and fight for their continued retirement benefits, because they are what makes this country work, and that's what we need to do as patriots.
Thank you. So the next question is about federal funding for Metro, another local issue, which I've spent a lot of time on in the last couple of years. Actually, most of it on getting local funding for Metro, but I'm asking you about federal funding. And we'll start with Lindsay Davis Stover. So a 10-year program of federal funding for the Metro transit system is about to expire. What would you do to get Congress to extend such funding? And would your proposal include provisions similar to those backed by Barbara Comstock to create a reform board and curb pay, benefits, and negotiating power of Metro's unionized workforce?
I think we have to fully fund the Metro. It is a great source of transportation, obviously, for our local communities, but also helps with our economic development. And we need to fund it at a level in which Metro can keep up to date with not only the safety and the maintenance, but also the expansion. And I don't believe that we have to compromise the rights of the workers to do that. I think that's incredibly important. And we also have to take it a step further when it comes to transportation. Transportation is one of the top issues in our country, or in our congressional district. There are so many people that are on the roads for hours to get to work and back. Whether it's fighting the gridlock, the safety of our roadways, or paying these outrageous tolls that families are having to pay. I met with a family a few weeks ago that has to pay over $40 in tolls to go to work and back, because if they don't get home in time, they're going to pay on the back end because the daycare is going to have to stay open later for them to pick up their children. So transportation is a top issue in our district, and it's an important issue. It's a quality of life issue for many of our families, and we have to ensure that we can fund it at a level that requires safety, maintenance, and we can keep up with the expansion.
I agree that transportation is most definitely a top issue in this area, and I would be in favor of a guaranteed funding mechanism at the federal level for WMATA, and I think what Barbara Comstock is trying to do to the transit unions is just horrible. These have been the workers in place for so long, they're familiar with the safety codes and regulations that need to go along with our WMATA trains, and so I would make sure to be backing our labor unions there. And our priority, of course, needs to be on safety and also on expanding our transit in terms of light speed rail out to the western part of this district, which is good for jobs and the environment.
I also support federal funding for Metro and a long-term sustainable funding source so that we can ensure that we are keeping up to date with maintenance. I also have been spending a fair bit of time commuting in with people across VA10, and one of the refrains I hear again and again is that access to Metro is really difficult, that the absence of park and rides and the absence of kind of arteries to get to Metro is critical and something we need to look at as well.
We absolutely need to fund Metro, and we need to fight back against what Barbara Comstock has been pushing, is that the reason that Metro is broken is because of our workforce. It's broken because we haven't funded it at the right level for years. And so I will push to make sure we get $500 million of annual funding to make sure we make the capital improvements that Metro needs, and make sure we extend it out farther into Virginia Tech.
You know, the competing Metro bills and the inability to sign a bill is exactly what's wrong with Congress. We have Barbara Comstock with a bill, and we have Jerry Conley with a competing bill. They're using the same Metro system. And it's all because Barbara Comstock wants to be able to take away the right or prevent unions from negotiating and have Metro be able to cut that. We have to stop that. We have to agree on what's right for the people and what's right for labor in this community. And the federal government has to fund permanently Metro's both operations and repairs. I like that bell.
Thank you. As a point of fact, Comstock proposed her bill in December, and we're supposed to get a hearing on it, in a matter of weeks. There's been no hearing, and the way this Congress is going, I'd be surprised if it's going to get resolved this year, which means that this election, who controls the House in this election, is going to make a big difference in terms of what happens with federal funding for Metro when it comes up early next year. Okay, the next question, going from the local now to international affairs. We'll be starting with Dr. Biggins. The House, of course, plays less of a role than the Senate in foreign policy, but it still does get involved in funding and policy decisions related to international affairs. There are a lot of international issues facing the country right now: Korea, Iran, trade, Russia. So you get your own choice. Pick one area, one issue involving international affairs where you would like to have an impact, and explain how you would do it.
Okay, I got it. This doesn't like me. So as you said, there are so many areas of international affairs that the United States needs to play a role in, and many of them are military, but I would like to focus on one that is not military, and that is the one in terms of global biopreparedness. We need to make sure that we are partners on the world stage. We just saw this in the last couple of weeks, yet another Ebola outbreak. I'm so glad to see that the vaccines are starting to be administered to the healthcare workers so that we have a chance to contain this. But we saw in the 2014 outbreak that this was a worldwide event, and so we need to make sure that as a world partner, we are funding our agencies such as the CDC and USAID to be able to get overseas and make the diagnosis that needs to happen. And according to the CDC, the United States, or only 70% of the world is prepared for yet another unknown outbreak. And here in the United States, I believe that if there was a severe pandemic in these United States, we would see more deaths than altogether accounted for in all of the wars and battles we've been in since 1776. And so I think, although this isn't a military operation, this is something that definitely needs our attention. I've had colleagues go over to Africa during the 2014 outbreak, and so I understand what it takes to help us be the world player on this stage.
Every issue that you mentioned, our ability to meaningfully address it is hindered astronomically by what the Trump administration has done with, the Congress condoning it to the State Department. And my first priority would be lifting up the value of diplomacy and restaffing the State Department so that it can actually engage in rebuilding the reputation that we have devastated around the world.
I've lost friends in a war of choice and believe firmly that the United States should lead with diplomacy. And the way that we need to get there at a time when we're engaged in wars all over the world without congressional input is passing an authorization to use military force that constrains the ability of this president or any other to use troops overseas without the approval of Congress, and that's what I'll fight for from day one.
Global warming, I believe, is our biggest threat to our national security. And I would do everything in my power, number one, in Congress to make sure that Donald Trump isn't reelected in November of 2020 so that we could stay in the Paris Climate Agreement, number one. I would work to make sure we did our job in Congress and were the check and balance on this president. And then finally, I would make sure that we did not upset the CAFE standards that the Obama administration set for our fuels and our efficiencies of our vehicles.
I'll be very clear. I think Donald Trump is our greatest national security threat. Whether it's North Korea, whether it's him turning its back on the Iran deal, I have spent much of my career working on the destruction and the aftermath of war, working to ensure veterans get the care they need and they deserve. And I believe we should never even flirt over Twitter with the idea of war if we're not also going to simultaneously make sure that we take care of those men and women when they come home.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to turn to crass politics. And this next question, we'll start with Allison Friedman, is about the strategy for beating Barbara Comstock, which I know is an issue of great interest to everyone in this room, except for the journalists who are neutral. So with the campaign war chest that Representative Comstock has amassed, how do you intend to compete for the public's attention with more limited funds? She has a reputation for being a tireless campaigner, going door to door, leaving no stone unturned, et cetera, et cetera. How are you going to meet that challenge? Allison Friedman.
First, I would take issue with your premise. She will have more money. I don't believe that she likes engaging with her constituents. And I'm
misinformed.
Look, Congresswoman Comstock's path to victory depends on voters not understanding her record. At every opportunity, Congresswoman Comstock has chose to vote to advance her own political priorities at the expense of her constituents, whether it's on health care, whether it's on the SALT deduction, whether it's on fundamental human rights and not effectively standing up to this president on issues ranging from the Muslim ban or congratulating him on going back on America's word on DACA. So in terms of crass politics, I've watched how Congresswoman Comstock has campaigned, right? She has depressed progressive turnout, represented herself as a moderate that her voting record doesn't bear out, and then appealed to moderates on national security and economic issues. I believe that my record in the national security sector and my ability to go toe-to-toe with her on issues of taxes and economics and supporting business in the region will be critically important. And I do also believe that bringing a candidate to go up against her that can offer a stark contrast of public service, who has been unequivocal in standing up to the NRA and standing up to corporate interests, will really matter. We know Congresswoman Comstock is going to be tough to beat, and it means that getting the right person out of this primary is absolutely critical.
I'm running a very different kind of campaign than the politicians who have run up and lost to Barbara Comstock in the past. I've been endorsed by the last two deputy directors of the CIA, retired admirals and generals and ambassadors, the most senior woman ever to serve in the Department of Defense. I'm running as a public servant who has dedicated my life to service and can paint a stark contrast. After 9/11, Barbara Comstock and I could have chosen to do anything. I spent my life since then defending us against those who attacked us. She spent her life attacking other Americans, so good at attack politics that she was the subject of documentaries and magazine articles. In this district full of public servants, I think people will get it. Thanks.
Barbara Comstock is most vulnerable in 3 areas: healthcare, guns, and holding this president accountable. The candidate that has the best record as it relates to those 3 issues, that appeals to both their background and their bio appeals to the broadest range of not just Democrats, but independents and moderates with respect to those 3 issues, is the Democrat that's going to be here, and I believe I offer that option in this race.
I think sometimes Democrats concentrate in Democratic vote-rich population areas. I have the life experience to be competitive in every single part of this district. We're doing just that. In fact, I was endorsed by the mayor of Winchester, which is the far western part of our district. I believe that it's so important to meet voters where they are, and I am proud to be doing that door to door, neighborhood to neighborhood, and community to community.
Make no mistake that Barbara Comstock is part of the problem of what we see in Congress right now. She accepts corporate donors, she votes along with Trump, and I pledge to do neither. I will not be taking any corporate PAC money as a candidate or as a congressperson, and I'm running because I want to be a true representative for VA 10. I've never really aspired to be a politician, but here we are. I think a lot of us are in that place too. And in terms of my background, scientists are true public servants. We do research for the greater good, and for infectious disease, we're developing vaccines for the most vulnerable. So I think I can draw the starkest contrast against Barbara Comstock.
Thank you. So now, taking the political question to a national perspective and looking at sort of the national Democratic strategy for taking back the House and winning support. And I'm basically combining two questions that I got from the public, actually 3 or 4 even, I got from the public. There was a lot of interest in this. It's basically, what approach do you think the Democrats should take to win independent voters? And in particular, how do you counter the impression that the Democratic Party is no longer the party of jobs and the so-called little guy, sometimes stated as the party that doesn't care about the 30 to 65-year-old white male? Dan Hellman.
So excited to go first. Yeah, I'll tell you a story about how we win in this district. I was out in Winchester. I've been out in Winchester a lot, but I was out in Winchester a couple of weeks ago for the Apple Blossom Parade. And I was walking around, walking up to people saying, "Hey, did you know there's a Democratic primary on June 12th?" And saying, "Hey, I'm a candidate there." And my campaign laughed at me because they saw me start to walk over to a guy who was wearing a Confederate flag on his hat. He had the stars and bars and a cross on his arm. I walked up to him. I said, "Hey, did you know there's a Democratic primary for Congress on June 12th? And he looked at me a little sheepishly. He said, "No, I didn't." He says, "I got one question for you." He says, "Do you support the NRA?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he says, "Well, that's a deal breaker for me." And I said, "Well, let me tell you why I don't support the NRA. Do you think bad guys ought to be able to get guns?" He says, "No." Well, I said, "Let me tell you something. 2 weeks ago, I walked into a gun show in our district and without a background check, bought an assault rifle like I carried in Afghanistan. How do you think bad guys aren't going to get guns if there's no background checks?" He looks at me for a second and says, "Really?" He says, "That's crazy." I said, "I know, and the NRA attacked me for it. That's why I don't support them. So can I count on your vote on June 12th? And he says, "Well, you've given me something to think about. Unless we're going across the district, every single person, not taking a single vote for granted or dismissing a single person, unless we're delivering a message that says this country is about giving every American a shot at the American dream, to enter the middle class, to take care of their families, to get health care when they're sick. That's what we stand for, and we're willing to talk to anybody about it, and we have a credible message to deliver it. That's how we win as a party here in Virginia 10. It's how we win across the country, and that's what I'm going to fight for.
I think Donald Trump, in part, is our president because of the failure of Democratic leadership and and the party's abandonment of part of America. And I think that both parties are to blame. But I also believe that what we have to offer, the independents, is pragmatic problem solving people's problems independent of party and politics, and just getting things done for people. That's what we have to do.
I think it's important that Democrats are able to run on the issues that are most important to their district. It's important that we're out in the western part of the district talking about the Farm Bill. We're talking about transportation. We're talking about small business. We're talking about healthcare. The issues that are important here locally are really what's going to change the hearts and minds of people. And I think it's important. Donald Trump has given us one thing. He's given us an opportunity to connect with every single voter and every single community, and that's what we're doing.
I think that it's long overdue. It's time for Democrats to make bold changes for this country that are long overdue, such as single-payer health care. And in terms of the forgotten group of what you said, the 30 to 65-year-old white males, I am in favor of a federal minimum wage to make sure that all workers can provide for their families. And I'm also in favor of removing the right to work state and a partial repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act so that all workers can be included. And I think Democrats need to be for issues and not just reactionary to what the Republicans are doing right now.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more. Pardon me.
I would talk about how both our budget and our tax bills need to be investment vehicles to get everybody access to an economy, whether that means, investments in going to school, or going to school again for the retraining that's needed, or saving to own your first home, or starting your own business. And we have not done a good job as Democrats of conveying why we are also for business, just inclusive business.
Now, thank you. So now let's go back to national issues. We'll talk about paying for college. We'll start with Paul Pelletier. So what is your position on free or reduced, federally subsidized free or reduced cost for college tuition?
Chicken in every pot. I mean, we have to be real about what college costs and what we can afford as Americans. So I believe that to make college free for everybody means everybody goes to college. I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I think we need to offer programs that are appropriate to what a student's ability and desires are in life. I believe we have to have training programs for students who want to be in trades. I believe we want to have training programs for schools, for kids who want an option other than college. And there are plenty of jobs with a lot of money, that pay a lot, that are outside necessarily of the college system. I do think we have to do a much better job of reducing the cost of college for people and offering kids opportunities to not only get loan forgiveness by going into public service, but by also making sure that those kids who have student loans are able to pay them off at a rate of interest that's affordable. Do you know the CFPB just recently disengaged a program that they had within the CFPB? This is the alleged head of the CFPB, Mick Mulvaney, just disbanded a program that was returning to students, that had returned to students, $75 million in money that had been fraudulently obtained from them by loan agencies. We need the CFPB. We need to make sure that the agencies that we have in Washington are protecting these kids. And we need to find ways and make sure that college tuition cost is reduced. Free college for everyone is a fantasy. If we're promising that, we're not going to beat Barbara Comstock.
I believe we have to make college more affordable. We also have to fully fund our community college programs and apprenticeship programs so that we can best prepare our workforce. The Trump administration has proposed cuts to Stafford loans and has proposed a 50% cut to the student work-study program that allows students to better pay for college. I think we should have a national service program that allows students to give 2 years back of national service, whether it's AmeriCorps, Vista, Teach for America, or other, in addition for loan repayment.
I too think that affordable college is paramount for this country. And for those that want to go to college, I believe at the community college level, we should provide free education and turn around also for the civil service requirement, and this could be a pilot program for four-year universities. And for those that have to take out loans to go to school, I think that we need to make sure that the federal government is not profiting from these loans and that the students are able to refinance their loans just as we're allowed to for auto loans or home loans when the market is more favorable.
I spoke a little bit about this in my last answer. I think we need to address an incentive system that rewards those who already have and penalizes or misses those who absolutely could if they were given the same access. I would absolutely oppose the cuts that the Trump administration has suggested for college affordability. I think we need to continue to support loan forgiveness for public service programs that are absolutely critical, and also look at business and personal tax incentives that truly make it accessible to the lower end of the economic spectrum.
So I largely agree in opposing the cuts by the Trump administration. Two things specifically that we ought to do in the short term, because I hear about college affordability all over the district. The first one is for students right now in college, changing the way in which the tax code treats repayment of student loans by businesses to make it a capital investment rather than being treated as compensation. That would allow us to more quickly encourage students to pay off their loans by having businesses invest in that. Secondly, I support a national service program, 2 years of college for every year of service, and I think that would help bring people together across race and class and help unite us as a country in addition to providing education.
Thank you. The next question is about abortion and reproductive rights, and we'll start with Lindsay Davis Stover. What would you do in Congress? Measures that you would support in Congress to protect a woman's right to choose and have greater access to abortion providers.
I think this election, as women, we have the most at stake. Choice for me is something that I won't compromise on. I, in fact, was in my early 20s and was running. I love to run each morning, and was running and was attacked from behind. And I fought like hell and got away. But it was very clear to me what would have happened had I not been able to get away. And the idea that I wouldn't have been able to have a choice or even a conversation with my family, my doctor, or my God would have been too much. We have to protect choice for women here in this country. We also have to make sure that we get back to a place where we have no-cost family planning. Under the ACA, women were able to have no-cost family planning, and the Trump administration has reversed that. We have to ensure that we can get that back. We have a lot at stake as women this next election, and it is so important that we get out there and ensure that we're able to take back the House.
I'm a firm champion of women's rights and women's health, reproductive rights, and I think that the only two people in the room should be a woman and her doctor when making these kinds of choices, and I would be a leading advocate for that in Congress. And I think that we need to continue to push this forward, and I was disheartened to see President Trump try to prevent certain clinics from even discussing the option of abortion, since it is legal in the United States right now.
I'm an unequivocal supporter of reproductive freedom. I'm proud to have been endorsed by Gloria Steinem, Dolores Huerta, Kamala Harris, People for the American Way, Feminist Majority Foundation. I have marched for women's rights my entire life and been carried in marches before I could walk. This is something that is core to who I am and something I will absolutely support in Congress.
After my second son was born, my wife developed a heart issue and was told never to get pregnant again. And we're very fortunate. We've had great access to health care. It's never happened. But I will be damned if the government has any role in my wife's decision of whether she continues to be my wife and continues to be mother of my boys. And I will be a fierce advocate for choice in Congress, and I will bring a personal story that says this is about our families and about protecting women in this country, and I'll be a fierce advocate.
The biggest obstacle and the biggest threat to a woman's right to choose what she wants to do with her own reproductive health is the United States Supreme Court. It is one judge away from destroying what we have. And I will tell you this, I will fight tirelessly in Congress to make sure that we get a United States Senate that's Democratic, number one, and number two, that this is the last term of Donald Trump, because we must make sure a Democratic president nominates our next Supreme Court justice.
Thank you. I think, given the time, that this is going to be the last question. It's on the criminal justice system, and we'll start with Dr. Biggins. What improvements would you seek to make to our criminal justice system to address problems such as excessive use of force by police, mandatory minimum sentencing, militarization of local police, and commercialization of prisons?
There we go. Takes a second. So I am a strong proponent of criminal justice reform. I outright reject mandatory minimum sentences, and I think that in terms of excessive use of force, we need to focus our police forces on being part of the neighborhood in which they patrol, but to make sure they're coming from our neighborhood, that they're looking like the individuals of the neighborhood, having those experiences, and also making sure that they're getting out of their patrol cars and getting to know the community that they're patrolling. And when we come across an incident of excessive force, we need to examine that particular police department to see, is that just the individual that needs further training, or is it a force-wide system where we need, similar to Ferguson, the Department of Justice to come in and provide the reform that's needed. And I think across the board, all police departments should require implicit bias training. And when we look at definitely no commercial prisons, for sure. And also, I would be in favor of decriminalizing marijuana. I think that it's a way to bring more African American men into the prison system, and it allows them to be not part of the economy, not moving forward with their lives. And so I'd like to see the decriminalization of marijuana so that they're not going to jail for longer periods of time for this.
I have spent my career advocating for rule of law, and that nobody should be above or below the rule of law. And right now we have a president who has not only pardoned, but then endorsed Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I believe that Black Lives Matter, and that we need to demonstrate that in our policy. I oppose mandatory minimums. I support bail reform. I support implicit bias training, and also community policing.
I think one of the biggest things we need to do to address imbalances in our criminal justice system is address mental health services reform. The fact that we lack access to mental health services, that many of our prisons lack access to mental health services, and that many people end up in prison because of mental health issues is a major issue in our country. Beyond that, yes, we need to work on commercial prisons to get rid of them. Community policing, I'm a major advocate of. If we can train Afghan police to do it, certainly we can do it here in the United States. So I think we have major opportunities to move forward in that.
Thank you. As a former federal prosecutor, this issue is near and dear to my heart. There are three things we could do tomorrow that would do a tremendous service to criminal justice reform. One would be bail reform. We absolutely have to do bail reform. There's no reason that people are stuck in jail for a long time, for months and months, while they should be out of jail. Number two, we need to make sure we ticket, not tase, not arrest. Number three, and finally, we need to have mandatory implicit bias training for every police officer in America.
30 seconds is not enough. I am strongly in favor of criminal justice reform, eliminating the mandatory minimum sentencing, ensure that we invest in community policing so that our officers are a part of the communities in which they're protecting. We have to invest in training programs to eliminate the inherent biases, and I am strongly against the privatization of our prison system. I don't believe companies should be making a buck off of those who are sent to prison.
Okay, so now we will move on to the closing statements. You each have a minute for a closing statement, and we'll start, just to confuse everyone, at this end with Lindsay Davis Stover and move down the line from right to left.
Well, thank you again for being here tonight. As you can see, anyone up here would be better than what we have now. In fact, anybody in this entire room would be better than what we have now. But I am thankful for the opportunity to earn your trust, your confidence, and your vote for 2 reasons. One, I have the lived experience. I understand what it's like to struggle. I can go head to head with Barbara Comstock and win. And secondly, I have extensive federal legislative experience. I've worked on bills that have helped raise the minimum wage, who have given college scholarships to children who have lost a parent in combat since 9/11, life-changing pieces of legislation for working families. And at a time when we have a reckless and irresponsible president in this White House, we need a strong Congress. And I will be able to hit the ground running on day 1 to not only make sure we keep this administration accountable, but we move forward our progressive ideas and values.
You know, if we just have a blue wave, we're not going to beat Barbara Comstock. We need a purple tsunami. We need Democrats. We need independents. And we need moderates to win this election. That's what it's going to take. And if we're promising people a chicken in every pot, free college tuition, free health care for everybody, we're not going to win. We have to have pragmatic, problem-solving moderates to win this race that have the character and culture and the experience to show the American people and the people of Virginia 10 that we can do it. Both Connor Lamb and Doug Jones, ex-federal prosecutors, won in moderate districts because they were pragmatic, problem-solving ex-prosecutors. I have that. I'll do that for you. I just need your vote. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the moderator, the organizers, and the timekeeper. You've all been wonderful, mostly. We have a tremendous opportunity to win here, but we can't count on a blue wave alone to get us there. Barbara Comstock has beaten every politician and DC insider, but I'm different. I'm a combat veteran running on a record of service, bringing bold solutions. I support a Medicare for all option. I'm ready to fight the gun lobby and pass responsible gun ownership laws in this country. I'm ready to take on campaign finance reform and reject all corporate PAC money. We've seen how powerful it can be to run on a record of service. Fellow vote vets endorsed Connor Lamb carried a district that Trump won by 20 points, and we can do that here. But I can't do it without your vote, but I hope to earn that on June 12th. Thank you.
I would offer that I am the candidate up here who can surf that purple tsunami. I have spent my entire life standing up to abuses of power, whether that would be people who, would infringe on voting rights, patients' right to privacy, or human traffickers. I have stood up to abuses of power, and now we have an epitome of one in the White House. But I've also worked across the aisle, and I've worked across the aisle to get concrete reforms through that would make a difference for people often left out or not listened to in the system. I've helped reform the federal government. I've passed landmark legislation. And when we come in January, we'll not only need people to uphold our values, but actually bring back a coalition that will govern to fix the mess that has been made. Thank you.
Thank you again for having us here today. My campaign is focused on not only helping you and I, but looking to the next future generations. And that's why I'm in support of the single-payer health care program. I'm in favor of protecting the environment to include increased high-speed rail throughout this nation to connect economies not only digitally, but physically as well. And I'm also in favor of a more equal and fully funding education and making sure that that's a priority. And I have one ask of you tonight, when you're going to vote on June 12th, or Maggie tomorrow, that you consider casting your ballot for the first woman scientist to ever serve in the House. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all the candidates at the micro level for sticking to the rules and for the most part respecting the time limits. And at the macro level, I think we should thank them for running. It takes a lot of energy, money, and especially time to do this, but it's vital to have a healthy civic democracy, and we're very appreciative. I'd also like to thank the organizers, the Sully Democrats, especially Liz Walker and Maggie Godbold, and now I will retire as moderator.
Thank you so much once again for moderating. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your timekeeping skills. And I also would like to thank these candidates. I know how hard it is, what a sacrifice it is to run. We need all of your energy. We need all of this. We have to win this year. So thank you very much. Don't forget, the Fairfax Democratic Committee is meeting in the cafeteria after this. Thank all of you for coming. Have a nice evening. Thank you.